I'm joined now by Congressman Jamie Raskin, and we wanted to talk today about an issue that's kind of surged into the national spotlight, which is Project 2025. So that's going to be the focus of this conversation here. So, Congressman, Project 2025 is basically the Gish Gallop of extreme agendas because Republicans have thrown so much at us in more than the 900 pages that encompass this whole plan that it's almost difficult to figure out where to start. So, to that point, when people ask you what Project 2025 is, what's your elevator pitch here? Like, what should every American know about it? And I think this is a useful place to start because, as us watching bring this info back into our circles of people, this will be able to inform how we use it to alert them.
Always a delight to be with you, Brian. Look, I'm not sure that I've gotten the perfect little elevator pitch down. I mean, what I've been saying is that, one, it is a collection of hundreds of the most extreme and dangerous policies that Trump's party have been advocating for years and now are trying to put into action in 2025. Two, it is a recipe for regime change to go from a constitutional democracy to the quasi-monarchical regime that the Supreme Court has been laying the red carpet out for. And three, it represents a civilizational death wish because in addition to everything else, it pulls the plug on all climate action and progress we've been making over the last several years. So that might be the single most important thing of all of the extreme policies there. It is absolutely reversing course in terms of what we need to be doing in terms of confronting climate change. Now, in terms of the first category, you can choose your poison. I mean, you can start with the dismantling of the Department of Education and all Title I funding in the country. You can start with federal abortion ban, attack on IVF and birth control. You can look at the idea of replacing 50,000 professional civil service employees with Donald Trump acolytes and functionaries and sycophants who will do his will in every federal agency and department. You can look at the dismantling of independent federal agencies and commissions by overruling Humphrey's executor and giving the next president, who they, of course, want to be Donald Trump, the power simply to replace people who are agency commissioners. So, I mean, there's no end to what you can look at.
Well, for me, the most chilling part of Project 2025, and you alluded to this, is that it seeks to place the entire executive branch under the direct control of the president, which would eliminate the independence of the DOJ and the FBI and the FCC and on and on. What could this mean when it comes to, for example, a DOJ that's now full of Trump loyalists who could lend credence to these bogus election fraud claims that we saw in 2020 and that we're certain to see in the coming elections, and especially if Trump wins, what we could see in 2028 when Republicans try to retain power?
Well, it's been a central tenet of American civic and government culture that the president does not control individual prosecutions. Now, when Trump was president, we already saw him make moves on that, where he got Attorney General Barr to lay off his friends and then tried to get him to prosecute certain people. But now it will be a completely unvarnished takeover of the Department of Justice. They will view it like the executive office of the president, and Trump will be ordering everything from the roundup in internment camps of millions of immigrants for deportation under the Department of Justice to the prosecution and harassment and investigation of people who Donald Trump considers to be his political enemies and adversaries. And I got to say, he certainly got my attention when he ran a Truth Social social communication with the pictures of all of the members of the January 6th Select Committee, with your humble servant first, and then Liz Cheney, and said all of these people are wanted for investigation and prosecution. I think he means it. He will also use his pardon power to pardon all the January 6th violent insurrectionists who attacked our police officers and engaged in seditious conspiracy to overthrow the government. And we know that he means it because he pardoned Michael Flynn, he pardoned Roger Stone, he pardoned Paul Manafort, he pardoned Steve Bannon, he pardoned Dinesh D'Souza. So he will pardon the political shock troops who he sicked on us on January 6th to go back out and to be in action again.
Well, normally I would say, well, the next election would be an opportunity to undo what we don't like. But if the entire federal government basically becomes an extension of the Trump White House and they're going to validate all of his election-denying claims, like the ones that we saw in 2020, then how do you win the next election after that if all of the right's fever dreams are suddenly fully legitimized by a corrupt federal government?
Well, it's very tough also with their discussion of the dismantling of the Voting Rights Act and any aggressive enforcement of the Voting Rights Act. They will be in league with people at the state level who are gerrymandering federal and state districts, dismantling majority Black and Hispanic districts, and engaging in voter suppression tactics. What's so disturbing about what the Supreme Court has done recently is that they are shaping a quasi-monarchical form of government in America for the first time. And we were conceived in revolution against the kings, the monarchs, and yet they now have lifted the president above the rule of law.
Well, to that point then, can you speak on how the Supreme Court's immunity ruling would go hand in glove with Project 2025's goal of granting the executive sweeping powers as it relates to state-sanctioned violence? Like, what would Trump be able to do? And more importantly, what would be the guardrails given this new power?
Well, Trump's lawyers argued in the D.C. Circuit that the president has the power to order assassination of his political rivals and cannot be prosecuted for that unless first he is impeached and convicted, something that has never happened in American history. We came close in the second Trump impeachment trial, but we fell short by 10 votes of conviction. The Supreme Court has now ruled that a president cannot be prosecuted for official acts because he's immune from them. Now, before the idea was, well, look, if somebody tried to prosecute a president for murder, for engaging in a lawful war, he would have a defense, and the defense would be this was a lawful act. He wouldn't be immune, but he would have a defense. But now they're moving from a defense doctrine, which makes sense, to an immunity doctrine, which is the president could order killings during a war. And if the Supreme Court defines that these are official acts simply because he wraps himself in his office, he couldn't be prosecuted for it. And so if that's true for killings, it's certainly true for lesser crimes like stealing and, bribery. And I mean, they have said that core functions of the presidency, like the pardon function, are completely off limits to prosecution. That means that the president could literally sell pardons. He could go on eBay and say, anybody gives me $1 million, gets a pardon, and those pardons are effective and the president can't be prosecuted for it.
Well, couldn't you make the argument that because the framers put into the Constitution civil immunity for legislators with the speech and debate clause, but purposefully left out criminal immunity for a president, knowing that they had the opportunity to do so, and yet purposefully put in a form of immunity for those legislators, couldn't you draw by negative inference the fact that, in fact, the Supreme Court ruling was completely antithetical to what the Constitution says, and the framers did not want to give immunity, criminal immunity, to a president?
I mean, the presidential immunity decision does violence to the text, the language of the Constitution, and makes a mockery out of their claims to being textualists. There's no language in the Constitution which supports that idea. And they concede there's no language. There's also no history in the original documents of the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, and so on, suggesting that anybody thought there should be immunity for the president. So where did they get this doctrine? The stork brought it. I mean, they pulled it out of a hat like Houdini. So they're not textualists. They're not originalists. They are constitutional radicals and fabulists who are just making it up as they go along. I mean, they're acting like a zoning board in suburban Akron, Ohio, who just have a party interest and they're supporting their guy. I mean, that's what's going on right now, and they are in a neo-monarchical mode. The people who are, making millions of dollars as Supreme Court justices, like Clarence Thomas, off of, free trips and free recreational vehicles and free tuition and free mortgages and so on. And the ones like Martha Ann Alito, these people would have been Tories at the time of our revolution. They would have been supporting the crown and the king. What they're doing is completely antithetical to the idea of government of the people and by the people and for the people, where all of us are treated equally under the rule of law. And, this has been a really alarming week for a lot of reasons, but Judge Cannon's dismissal of the prosecution against Donald Trump for the stolen documents case is extraordinary, but I think it is an omen of things to come.
The framework of Project 2025 is Christian nationalism. It's what I think is very fair to call Christofascism. We've already gotten a taste of what that would look like through abortion bans in the name of the Bible and requirements that the Ten Commandments be shown in schools. This is in Louisiana, as you mentioned. As we sit here, you and I are Jews. We've got viewers who are Muslim and atheist and Buddhist and, of course, other Christians. We've got viewers who are LGBTQ. In what ways would non-heterosexual, non-Christians face threats in the event that Project 2025 is enacted?
Well, that does seem to be the heart and soul of the Project 2025 mission, to install Christian nationalism. You could view that as the social base of this program, which otherwise advances the interests of very few people, Trump and Trump's family, certain large corporations, but it is through the connection to the religious right that they actually, bring in millions of people through, various mega churches around the country. Some of it is in the realm of embracing public endorsement of religion. They want the Ten Commandments to be displayed in schools. Louisiana's already gone down that road. It's happening in a number of other states. My colleagues have been arguing for it in Congress. They wanted to vote on it. I went to the Rules Committee and I said, if we're going to vote on the Ten Commandments in the House of Representatives, we should vote on each commandment separately. You shouldn't be able to get away with the omnibus package. But this is like the deadly serious stuff. And, as we saw in the prior Trump administration and in other Republican administrations, there's a real effort to channel all, housing assistance, social charity, soup kitchen money, anything like that through religious entities. They want that to be the only mechanism for people getting social assistance in the country. So, I think that's very real, and we will see expanding efforts to declare America a Christian country. A couple of Republicans have said that recently. That is totally antithetical to the Constitution, which says there shall be no religious test for public office. There shall be no laws respecting an establishment of religion. There should be free exercise of religion, and we have equal protection under the laws. But for Speaker Johnson, the Bible is superior to the Constitution. The Constitution has to be read through the prism of the Bible, and it's a complete inversion of what Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and Tom Paine and Ben Franklin were talking about.
I think had you asked any of us a few years back whether we'd feel confident whether this Ten Commandments law from Louisiana would be appealed to the Supreme Court and struck down, everybody would feel fine that it would be and that precedent would stand. But if you ask us now if the Supreme Court would uphold this kind of law, even in spite of the fact that there is recent precedent shutting down this exact issue, I don't think you'd find too many people who would be as certain. So what do you say to folks who basically have lost faith then in this Supreme Court to be able to be fair arbiters of what the law actually says?
I mean, I would say I'm with them. We have to fight for the Constitution and its meanings. We've got to educate people about the Constitution that the founders wrote. They were trying to break from centuries of religious superstition and government-run churches and church-run governments. They were trying to break from centuries of religious warfare between the Catholics and the Protestants that was every bit as vicious as the warfare today between the Sunni and the Shia Muslim forces. They wanted to break from Inquisition and holy crusades, witchcraft trials, and all of that. And these people are trying to take us back. We already have a Supreme Court decision, Brian, Stone versus Graham from 1980, which rejected Ten Commandment displays in the schools. But you're right, if it came back today, they could probably find a majority on the court to go with Justice Thomas's argument, which was an argument that the prior right-wing justices have made, that the only thing the Establishment Clause does is prevent the government from setting up its own church. But if it endorses religion, if it embraces a particular religious idea, that's okay, as long as it's not setting up its own church and making the other churches illegal. And I think we're very much headed to that interpretation of the First Amendment, which is extremely limited. There are also justices who have begun to return to the really old idea that Congress can't set up a religion, an official church, but states can do it. Because after all, the First Amendment just says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. But it doesn't say that states can't do that. And, that was sort of how the theocrats, when the country started, were pushing. The Congregationalists, the Puritans were going to run Massachusetts, and the Catholics would run Maryland, and you could get the Anabaptists, the Amish and the Mennonites in Pennsylvania, and so on. That has been a hard-fought victory to say, no, the values of the Establishment Clause apply not just against the federal government, but against the states too.
Well, you've spoken out against Project 2025's attacks on the EPA. And as you mentioned earlier, when it comes to climate, this is the foundational issue that we face right now, an existential issue that we face. Last year was the hottest year on record. Americans are facing extreme heat waves, flooding, wildfires, storms. Project 2025, meanwhile, would ban the use of the words climate change and weaken not only the EPA, but also weather forecasting and climate tracking programs. What long-term, irreversible danger will these measures pose to Americans?
Well, the ultimate danger, which is that the planet becomes uninhabitable by our species. I mean, if our brains were bigger, Brian, it's the only thing we would all be working on. We are in a civilizational emergency right now. And they not only want to undo every single regulation promulgated under the Biden administration and reverse all of the policies that we've adopted with respect to promoting wind and solar and hydroelectric and so on. They don't want to make it possible even to mention the words climate change. So as we experience record temperatures all around the world, 125 in Saudi Arabia, 115 or 18 in Arizona, the ocean waters outside of Mar-a-Lago are over 100 degrees for many days in the summer. As all of this is going on with the rise in the ocean and record drought and record forest fires with millions of acres being consumed in the West, they're only, they don't want to use science to understand it. They're very clear about it. So they will just describe it in religious terms that, it's the end days. It's the end days prophecy from the book of Revelation. We are, living through the apocalypse. They will, continue to support the most right-wing forces in Israel, like, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and Netanyahu, because they believe that Jesus Christ will return to Israel in the rapture and bring his followers with him, leaving everybody else to suffer 1,000 years of tribulation. I mean, that doesn't sound like much of an agenda for humanity.
Yeah.
if that's their plan. And so we've got to get this back into a secular framework of understanding what is happening to us with climate change, because otherwise the religious extremists are really going to lead us down the road to disaster in domestic and in foreign politics.
Given how harmful Project 2025 is, given all of the danger that we've discussed today, is there any hope for stopping Project 2025 if Republicans do win in November?
Well, I'd rather not contemplate that hypothetical. I mean, I'm not much in the prognostication business, as you know, Brian. I'm in the mobilization business. I've been out with our Democracy Summer program and with the Democratic campaigns all over the country. I've been to 20 states. We've got to avert this. I mean, if worse really were to come to worse, we would obviously not be without resources politically, intellectually, financially, culturally to resist. But the vast majority of the people are with us. Look, Trump's strongest election was in 2016, which he lost by more than 2.5 million votes, but he eked out a victory in the Electoral College, right? Then 2018, that was a wipeout election for them, a huge victory for us. In 2020, we won the presidency back. And Biden beat him by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. In 2022, they suffered another really disappointing election. They thought that it was going to be a wipeout against us. It was not. So the vast majority of the American people are on our side when it comes to fighting climate change, defending women's reproductive rights and women's freedom and women's equality and women's basic health care. People understand now that abortion is a health care issue, as women are, left hemorrhaging in the backseat of cars while doctors in red states have to figure out whether they're going to risk being arrested and prosecuted for seeing them because of an ectopic pregnancy or some other problem that occurs. The people are on our side on, pretty much every issue you can think of. I mean, the only issue where they were getting traction against the Democrats was immigration, and President Biden and the Senate Democrats came up with an historic compromise that the Democrats and Republicans both agreed to, and it got vetoed by the fourth branch of government, Donald Trump, who said no, he didn't want to see any progress on the border. He wanted a border crisis and something to run against. So leaving aside immigration, which is now kind of a wash since we tried to legislate on it and they stopped it, there's really no issues where they have any traction against us. The people are on our side. So we just need to, get it together on the Democratic side quickly at the top of the ballot and move through the problems we've been having and get back to the issues in this campaign. We've got one party which is saying the government has got to be an instrument for the common good of the people, to serve everybody, to protect our rights and freedoms, versus a party which says, no, the government is the plaything and the instrument of private self-enrichment of the guy who gets in with his family and his private corporations. And then, he's free to make whatever deals, private or public, he wants with the autocrats in Moscow and, Vladimir Putin and Orban and Xi and Erdogan, you name it. Like, that's what we're looking at right now. This is an election that is about the continuing progress of strong democracy in America being willing to face all of the problems in the world, including climate change, versus authoritarianism and autocracy and us moving into a completely different kind of government. And most of us grew up thinking that we would never face an election like this or a choice like this, but this is where we are, and it's all hands on deck.
Well, given the breadth of the threats that we're facing right now, our ability to even be able to prosecute this case, to your exact point, will kind of hinge on at least having some clarity in terms of what's happening at the top of the ticket. Can you give some insight into whether you believe that this decision for Biden to run is definitive, or whether you believe that it's still dynamic? Like what are we looking at here behind the scenes to some degree?
Yeah, I mean, to my mind, like any decision in politics about running or not running is 1,000% in until you're 1,000% out. Right. And so, and Joe Biden has won our nomination. I mean, people forget that he's won it. He's got 99% of the delegates. And unless he changes his mind, he is going to be our nominee. So what we need to be doing is building Democratic victory at every other level of government. And that is going to be a decision that he's going to make. And he may have already made it. I know people got mad at former Speaker Pelosi when she said, it's his decision to make. But I suppose, as long as people are still talking about it, it's a continuing decision that he's going to make. Obviously, the debate shook people up. But, I think that politics today cannot be people waiting around to see if anything has changed at the top of the ticket. Our job is the same regardless. We need to be telling people what Project 2025 is all about and how it is a dagger, pointed at democracy at this point. And everything we've built in the country, including Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, which they continue to, agitate against, including voting rights, political democracy in the states. All of it is on the line. So we've got to be doing whatever we can to organize, at the grassroots level.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, thank you so much for taking the time.